Now, shift our focus to the Maldives. What's happening there? India and China are closely watching the presidential elections. As thousands of people cast their votes, tensions, of course, seem to be rising between President Ibrahim Solih and the opposition's ideology on supporting India or China.
Yes, let's break it down. You see, Solih's party, which has championed its India First policies, battling the former President Yamin's party, which upholds its India Out campaign. So which one of these polarized ideologies will win the elections, and how will the result affect India? Our next report breaks it down.
The Maldives has had mixed relations with India and China. The two nations have had a substantial political and economic influence. But now the presidential elections may change the dynamics. As thousands of people vote for their new president, pro-India and pro-China election candidates wait for the results. Let's look at presidential candidate, the incumbent Ibrahim Solih, who is seeking a second five-year term as president. When Solih came to power back in 2018, he worked towards bringing an end to state persecution of opponents, introduced a minimum wage policy, brought free university education, and invested heavily in infrastructure in the remote and impoverished islands. But one of the most significant moves was that he returned the Maldives to India's orbit. India helped the island nation immensely. New Delhi provided a $250 million grant during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Development of Addu as
India initiated a $400 million project to build a bridge in the Malay region. Reports say that by the year 2021, the Maldives had racked up debt from India worth 26% of its GDP. The president has even championed an India First policy during his time in power. Even Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi had attended Solih's inauguration and welcomed back the Indian Air Force, which was earlier removed by former President Yamin. But on the other side stands Mohammad Muizzu, a candidate of Yamin's Progressive Party-led coalition. The pro-China candidate has pledged to expel the Indian military personnel stationed in the Maldives. Experts say that if Muizzu's coalition comes to power, there is some risk that democracy itself could be in peril. Plus, tensions between New Delhi and Malé would undoubtedly climb. Yamin's party and other activist groups have regularly staged street protests urging a reduction of India's influence in the Muslim nation. In the time of former President Yamin's rule, he heavily borrowed from China for infrastructure projects. Now, this turned the nation into a focal point for geopolitical competition. Solih's administration called China's lending practices a debt trap and restored the Maldives' traditional diplomatic stance with India. So the election will decide if the island nation will tip towards India or China. What has also raised the stakes for the US is that Maldives has received its first resident US ambassador, Hugo Huoyon. Now this comes after the Maldives reopened its embassy in Washington, D.C. and the US reopened its embassy in Seattle. The move seems to be an attempt to strengthen ties between the two nations in the backdrop of rising competition between the United States and China for diplomatic clout in the Indian Ocean islands. Will the Maldives be able to maintain its traditional diplomacy with India, or will it fall back on its debt trap relation with China? In good news for India, Solih remains the front runner in the upcoming polls, but he will need more than half of the votes to avoid a run-off poll. So will the India-Maldives bond remain in safe hands? Will Solih be able to keep India first in the future? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.